The growing popularity of the first Final Fantasy helped the originally unscheduled second installment arrive on Japanese store shelves 364 days later. Since Final Fantasy I was never intended to be a smash hit, its story didn't lend itself to a sequel. Because of this, Square felt the freedom to take numerous aspects of the first game in a completely new direction. Final Fantasy II was released in Japan on December 17, 1988. Sakaguchi, Amano, and Uematsu were back on board for the sequel, as well as several members from the original development team. The story began with 4 youngsters fleeing the forces of the Emperor of Palamecia, who had attacked their hometown of Fynn and killed their parents. While there was no prophecy that said they were destined to destroy evil and save their world, the heroes eventually became a humble warrior, a cautious mage, a simple-minded monk, and a morally conflicted Dark Knight. But unlike Final Fantasy I, there was no opportunity to upgrade these classes. For the first time, they were ingrained into their characters. They also didn't level up like their predecessors. Instead, the individual attributes of each character leveled up, including hit points, magic power, stamina, strength, spirit, agility, intelligence, and evasion. These categories would grow stronger the more they were used or needed, and the same was true for weapons and spells. Focusing on a character's melee or magical abilities would cause the opposite to be adversely affected, forcing players to choose one or the other. This new system was designed to create a more realistic progression formula based on cause and effect, and give the player more control over what piece of armor, type of weapon, or brand of magic they wanted to increase in power. However, it opened up several opportunities to cheat the system and build up your characters much faster than intended. When you canceled the command you previously assigned to one of your battling sprites, the performance enhancement would still be registered. And just because you got more hit points for getting hit by the enemy, that didn't mean that your own party members couldn't fulfill that role as well. Careful and patient players could level up their party significantly in just one battle, by attacking one another or reissuing multiple commands. The walls that blocked your party from the on-screen enemies came crumbling down to create a wide-open combat window with all the necessary information at the bottom. This housed current and max HP, which could now be raised well over 999 points. Final Fantasy II also fashioned a new style of questing and story progression, which involved memorizing key terms from NPC dialogues that would be brought up in later conversations. It was a process that involved lots of unpredictable inspection and time-consuming bouts of trial and error going through the conversation trees. Mechanical and heavily scripted as it may have been, this new way of playing introduced a higher degree of hands-on interactivity that allowed players to be socially immersed in the game's world. The fresh but flawed experience method and question-answer plot progression were just 2 of many additions to the sequel. While these didn't return in later games, the following developments became standards within the franchise. Final Fantasy II was the first time you could fight with less than 4 members in your party, and have characters come and go throughout the story, including the White Wizard Minwu, the passive General Gordon, the family man/pugilist Joseph, the spunky pirate Leela, and the wyvern-wielding Ricard, the Last Dragoon. Boat and airship rides began on a predetermined path, until you were able to control each craft by yourself, and you were no longer required to dock boats at harbors to reach the mainland. Added to the fleet in the second game was the Snowmobile, a 3-wheeled sailing vessel that allowed you to cross an epic mass of ice. If they were lucky enough, players could stumble upon a stable hidden in a forest, housing a familiar Final Fantasy staple, the Chocobo. It was Final Fantasy II that introduced the world to these beaked companions that helped players cross the continent faster with 0 enemy encounters. And you couldn't get in an airship in 2 until you met Cid for the first time. Players would bump into this pilot/scientist/engineer/explorer many times in the years to come, as his namesake continued throughout the main series and beyond. Cid taxied you around the map and eventually gave you his pride and joy to use at your leisure. Final Fantasy II's story was much more involved than the tale that was told before it. The characters had preset relationships, and several heroes passed on or blinked away, sacrificing themselves for the greater good. In total, 6 good guys died before the story was over. The plot strangely mirrored that of Star Wars Episode IV, involving young heroes joining a rebellion. The Empire imposed its will using a giant metal ship, with a distraught princess tucked inside. Final Fantasy II almost made its way to the States in 1990 under the subtitle Dark Shadow over Palakia, but it was cancelled due to development time and the release of the Super Nintendo. US audiences would have to wait until 2003 to play Final Fantasy II when it was reinvented, along with its predecessor, for consoles, handhelds, and mobile phones around the world. Final Fantasy II was the first sequel in the industry not to feature any characters or locations from the game that preceded it. It turned the unexpected RPG series into a bona fide franchise, and left Japanese gamers waiting for 16 months to play the next sequel. American gamers didn't get to play it until last year. Final Fantasy III was released in Japan on April 27, 1990, and was once again forged by the team that created the series. It began with an earthquake opening up a hidden cavern entrance on a floating island near the village of Ur. 4 orphaned youngsters disguised as Onion Knights left their guardian in search of the altar cave. Within it, they discovered the Wind Crystal. The crystal bestowed upon them jobs, a Final Fantasy tradition. Instead of choosing one class or having the story do it for you, FF3 let you switch between multiple professions, including newcomers Archer, Scholar, Geomancer, Viking, Magic Knight, Bard, and Sage. All carried specific weapons and armor, and more were unlocked when each new crystal was found. Each job had its own special skill, and Final Fantasy III opened up a new space in your battle menu to include it. This gave thieves the ability to steal, and dragoons the opportunity to jump. But no matter the job, they all leveled up the same way, as the experience point system returned from the first game. 2 of the more significant new jobs were Conjurer and Summoner. Both of them were able to bring forth magical beings for the first time in the series. These summons, like Odin, Ramu, Shiva, Ifrit, Titan, and Leviathan, could be purchased in stores or obtained by defeating the powerful creatures themselves. They played no role in the actual storyline, but their additional firepower was definitely welcome. Just as the second chapter introduced chocobos, the third forced you to meet Moogles, cute, fuzzy little bat-winged bear monsters that guarded the reclusive wizard Doga. The Moogle would become a series staple, selling you magic, fighting alongside your party, and keeping your online house in order. To lighten up the early game's inventory limitations, 3 fed their bird runners a little too much grain and produced fat chocobos, plump creatures that could swallow items and transport heavy loads across the map. A submarine and several new types of airships were introduced in 3, including the Nautilus, Enterprise, and the Invincible, a warship that could be explored like a castle, complete with shops and private quarters. Cid helped you tour the skies once again, and even followed your party around for a while once you freed him from the ghost town of Kazis. The forgetful warrior Desh hitched up with your crew after he gave you mini-magic, the ability to shrink your entire party and enter several mouse-sized areas. The story placed the 4 orphaned heroes in an eternal struggle between the forces of light and darkness. When one was disrupted, the other would call on 4 warriors to reset the fragile equilibrium. Ages ago, foolish mortals attempted to absorb the power of light, calling forth dark warriors to fight back. The Gulgans, a circle of blind prophets, predicted that one day the reverse would occur, and these light warriors would hopefully restore the balance for good. These events came to pass thanks to a spiteful mage named Zand, a pupil of the wizard Noah, and a sentient being called the Cloud of Darkness, a hive mind of evil that aimed to tip the world off kilter while an unstoppable void consumed it. Final Fantasy III was unfortunately shadowed by the release of 6 in America 4 years later. The 6th installment was renamed 3 as it was the 3rd Final Fantasy released in the US. This almost erased all knowledge in the States of the 3rd Famicom game, and meant we wouldn't get our hands on it until it was ported to the Nintendo DS 16 years later. The 3rd Final Fantasy was a huge adventure, definitely the biggest RPG Square had made so far. It brought the most successful elements of the first 2 games together, and helped build a growing curiosity as the series would soon have to move ahead a generation. But before it made the jump, it met another proud landmark in its 20-year history. On July 12, 1990, 2 months after Final Fantasy III came out in Japan, the original Fantasy was released on the Nintendo Entertainment System in America, and a legion of English-speaking gamers boarded an airship ride into the future of role-playing. Join us next week for the third installment in our 13-part Final Fantasy retrospective. In Part 3, we'll continue on to the next 2 games in the series that premiered the active time battle system and ability points, and began an unforgettable 16-bit trilogy on the Super Famicom.